The sun hung low in the sky on June 6, 1944, casting a shimmering light across the churning waters of the English Channel. As dawn broke, the coastline of Normandy lay eerily beautiful, the golden sands marred by the shadows of chaos approaching. The quiet murmurs of the waves were soon drowned out by the thunderous roar of artillery fire, as American soldiers prepared for one of the most pivotal moments of World War II. The tang of salt mixed with gunpowder hung heavily in the air, a stark reminder of the battle that lay ahead. The cries of men, some filled with determination, others with terror, intertwined with the clattering of equipment and the hum of warplanes overhead. Among the throngs of soldiers was Joe Dawson, a young man barely 20, his heart pounding with anticipation and fear. His hands, calloused from weeks of preparation, gripped his rifle tightly. In that moment, surrounded by chaos, Joe could hardly imagine the horrors that awaited him on the shores. Familiar faces, friends forged through the fires of training, looked back at him, some sharing a fleeting smile, while others wore expressions of grim resolve. They were brothers in arms, bound together by a shared mission to liberate their allies and change the course of history. The LCVP landing craft jolted to a stop, and Joe's stomach twisted. The ramp lowered, revealing a hellish landscape dotted with the chaos of war. The sound of bullets whizzing by blended with the cries of the wounded and dying, painting a shocking picture of the reality they faced. As he charged off the craft, into the fray, his feet splashed through shallow waves mixed with blood and chaos. This was not the glorious liberation he had envisioned. It was a struggle for survival. Each step brought echoes of the past, memories of family, dreams of a future, and moments of laughter that seemed impossibly distant in that grim tableau. Above, the sky was aflame with bursts of anti-aircraft fire, and the earth shook with explosions, testing the very spirit of those who fought upon it. As Joe moved deeper into the chaos, a turning point unfolded in front of him. An explosion erupted nearby, throwing him to the ground. Pain shot through his leg as he realized the severity of his injury. Desperation clawed at him as he struggled for breath, the world fading in and out, lost in a haze of fear and confusion. Then a figure appeared, a nurse, her uniform stained with dirt and sweat, but her face radiated a fierce determination. With precision, she knelt beside him amidst the chaos, her hands working urgently to staunch the bleeding. Joe felt a flicker of hope amidst the storm of despair. This moment, so simple yet profound, would weave their fates together, even as the world around them fell apart. The nurse, her name forever etched in the pages of his life, would become a symbol of resilience in the face of unbearable hardships. As he lost consciousness, he understood that her care was more than just physical. It was a lifeline amidst the brutality of war. Years would pass, and Joe would carry the memory of that day, the wrenching irony that in the most devastating moments, a human connection could shine brightest. Eventually, time would lead them on separate paths through decades of silence. Yet the impact of that moment in the turmoil of war would linger in his heart. Joe Dawson would return, not just as a soldier, but as a man seeking closure and gratitude, 6 decades later, in search of the nurse who saved him, forever altering the course of his life. The stench of antiseptic clung to the air, mingling with the faint undertone of sweat and fear. It was June 9th, 1944, and the makeshift hospital, a repurposed barn outside Normandy, echoed with the groans and murmurs of men clinging to life. Joe Dawson lay on a thin mattress, his body a battlefield of its own, each breath a struggle against the waves of pain crashing over him. A bullet had found his side in the chaos of war, a cruel reminder of mortality. As he lay there, the noise of distant artillery thundered like a cruel reminder of the chaos that had catapulted him into this moment. Each pulse of pain radiated from his wound, yawning open like a dark chasm that threatened to swallow him whole. Joe's thoughts swirled in a blur of confusion. He was acutely aware that death had whispered his name in the heat of battle. His gaze drifted weakly around the dimly lit barn, a temporary haven for men who had faced gunfire and explosions, now reduced to whispers and frantic breaths. Each wounded soldier shared an unspoken bond, a pact of survival against all odds. Yet in the crushing uncertainty, Joe felt profoundly alone. The specter of death loomed close, wrapping its icy fingers around his heart, and he found himself grappling with thoughts he had never dared to entertain before. What if this was the end? In that heavy silence, Joe's mind flickered back to the faces of his fellow soldiers, some of whom would never return home. Memories of laughter and camaraderie danced tauntingly at the edges of his mind. He assured himself that he would fight for them, for all of them, but the weight of his injury pressed down like an anchor, dragging him closer to despair. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps. Nurses rushed in like angels weaving through a dense fog, their faces set with determination. They moved swiftly, their hands trained, yet Joe couldn't help but see the struggle within their eyes, a mix of compassion, fear, and fatigue that echoed his own. Among them was a woman with auburn hair tied back tightly, her brow furrowed in concentration. He wanted to reach out to her, to connect, but the intensity of his pain wrapped around him like chains, preventing any ounce of strength from escaping. "Stay with me, Joe," she encouraged, her voice threaded with urgency as she approached his bedside. Nurse Thompson was her name, he recalled faintly, her gentle hands probing the wound. Each touch sent new currents of agony through him, but a flicker of hope ignited within the haze of his suffering. "Someone is here with me," he thought, even as shadows danced before his eyes, threatening to consume him. As the moments stretched into hours, a tenuous bond formed in those brief encounters. Her words became a lifeline, grounding him in reality, even as his body fought against the tide. He was not just an American soldier. He was Joe Dawson, and she was his savior, despite the chaos surrounding them. But darkness wasn't finished with him yet. As the hour grew late, a rumble of artillery shook the barn once more, echoing like the crack of doom. Joe felt the tremor deep within his bones, fear blossoming anew as he wondered if this would be his last moment of consciousness. Would he be remembered or fade into obscurity, along with the countless lost souls? With all his strength, Joe summoned the courage to cling to life. Perhaps there was still a chance to return home, to thank the nurse who saved him. Perhaps he could find a way to honor the sacrifices of his brothers who had fallen, a glimmer of light amidst the shadows of warfare. It was this flicker of resolve, a stubborn refusal to succumb to despair, that began to illuminate the pathways of his mind, a path that would lead him, 60 years later, back to Normandy. Once again, the specter of death loomed closer, but in that moment, as Nurse Thompson's voice wove through his consciousness, Joe Dawson held on to his pulse of hope. He would not let go. Amidst the chaos of war, The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and the bitter tang of fear. It was June 12, 1944, just days after the D-Day invasion, where bodies littered the bloody sands of Normandy. In the makeshift hospital tent, under dim, flickering lanterns, Nurse Anne Dubois moved with a determined grace, her hands steady despite the relentless turmoil around her. Anne was a beacon of hope, her heart as resilient as her spirit. She dove into the fray of shattered lives, tending to the wounded with a fierce compassion that cut through the din of battle. Her uniform was stained with the remnants of her tireless efforts, but her eyes shone with purpose, reflecting an unwavering dedication to those in need. Among them was Joe, an American soldier whose life hung precariously in the balance. As they met, the chaos of the outside world felt distant. Joe lay on the cot, pain coursing through him like fire. Yet within Anne's presence, a soothing warmth enveloped him. "You're going to be all right," she whispered softly, wiping the sweat from his brow with a cloth that barely had the chance to stay clean. Her voice was a balm, cutting through the horrors that had befallen him. The brief moments they shared felt like an eternity. Each interaction was a lifeline thrown amidst a vast sea of despair. Anne's gentle touch as she dressed his wounds, her melodic voice as she reassured him through the dark hours, forged an unspoken bond. She told him stories of home, evoking visions of family and peace as a distraction from his suffering, creating an oasis of humanity within the violence surrounding them. They were just two souls intertwined in the tapestry of war, each seeking solace in the other. Joe found strength in Annie's perseverance, while she drew courage from his spirit. In those fleeting seconds, amidst desperate cries and distant explosions, a flicker of hope ignited, a promise of survival that transcended the battlefield. As days turned to weeks, the healing began, not just of body, but of spirit. Anne worked tirelessly until Joe's recovery was within reach. "You're strong, Joe," she encouraged, her entire being focused on the wounded fighter before her. "You will return home." Her dedication transformed pain into resilience, and he clung to her words like a precious gift. Yet, as the war raged on, their paths began to diverge. It was not long before Joe was called back to the front lines, the reality of their separation looming overhead. With a heavy heart, he whispered his thanks, but words felt inadequate for the depth of his gratitude. The intensity of their brief acquaintance lingered, a cherished memory against the backdrop of a dark history. As the battle for Normandy continued, Anne remained a guardian of souls, while Joe fought valiantly, forever altered by their shared moment amidst the ruins of war. Though they were separated by miles and risks, a bond had been formed, one that would echo through time, waiting for the day it would reconnect them under different circumstances, a testament to the resilience of human spirit even in the darkest of times. The world had moved on since that life-altering encounter, yet the impact of that moment remained engraved in both their hearts. Each had their own journey now, shaped profoundly by fate's intertwining hands. Little did they know, the tides of time would soon bring Joe back to Anne, 60 years later, to finally express the gratitude that had burned quietly in his heart all those years. Boldly commemorating the past, they both prepared for a reunion like no other. The year was 1945, the air thick with the pungent scent of burnt metal and gunpowder as the echoes of conflict began to fade. On the European battlefield, The rumble of artillery fire had slowly been replaced by an uneasy silence, a whisper of hope creeping through the chaos. At long last, the war was drawing to a close. But for Joe, the weight of his experiences was far from over. As combat operations wound down, Joe lay in a makeshift hospital tent on the outskirts of Normandy, his body shattered, but his spirit unyielded. Memories of battle danced vividly in his mind. Friends lost, soldiers running in chaos, and the specter of death looming at every turn. But amidst the chaos, there stood a beacon of care. Nurse Claire, who had tended to him with a compassion that felt foreign in the tumult of war. Her gentle hands and soothing words became his lifeline, a reminder of humanity in a world turned upside down. On May 8, 1945, Joe and thousands of soldiers heard the news. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The jubilation among the troops reverberated through the camp. While victory was celebrated, for many, the aftermath of their emotional battle was just beginning. Joe watched other men laugh and embrace, yet he felt adrift among the throngs of joyful soldiers. Each cheer reminded him of the friends he would never see again, leaving him wrestling with his own silent demons. Within days, Joe was flown back home, the roar of the plane's engines drowning out the distant echoes of war. As he peered out of the small window, he saw the lush green patches of the countryside below, contrasting starkly with the desolation he had left behind. This was the world he longed to return to, yet it was marred by the memories that clung to him, unshakable and heavy like a shroud. Each mile brought fresh pangs of guilt, survivor's guilt that gnawed at him ceaselessly. Once back on American soil, the excitement of family and friends welcomed him. They cheered, but Joe stood on the periphery, struggling to appreciate the joy around him. He was alive, yes, but at what cost? The laughter rang hollow in his ears, a reminder that while the world had turned the page to a new chapter, he was still trapped in the past, haunted by the faces of those who had fought valiantly alongside him. As time passed, the chaos of the battlefield began to recede into the depths of his memory, yet the emotional scars remained raw. Each morning brought a new battle, a struggle to engage with life while haunted by fragments of a lost brotherhood. It was a silent war of its own, one that would shape him for years to come. Joe would find solace in the small things: a quiet morning coffee, the warmth of the sun on his face, the laughter of children playing nearby. But every so often, in the stillness of night, the specters of Normandy would return, forcing him to confront the unresolved feelings that lurked just beneath the surface. His mind would drift back to Claire, the nurse who had stitched his wounds, both physical and emotional. In the depths of his struggle, he felt a profound need to express his gratitude, to seek closure for the ghostly memories that lingered in the corners of his mind. Perhaps, against the backdrop of festering pain, there lay the promise of healing, a call to reunite with the one person who had reminded him of hope amidst despair. He yearned for the day when the chaotic remnants of war would light the path to reconciliation. But for now, as Joe stood poised on the precipice of a new journey, the war within him still loomed large. The years following the war found Joe in a world that felt foreign and overwhelming. The sounds of celebration, the laughter of children, the routine pace of everyday life, it all blended into a cacophony that deepened the void inside him. The bright sun that emerged in the mornings could never dispel the darkness lingering behind his eyelids, where memories of battle replayed in vivid detail. Every night, as dusk cast shadows over his home, Joe wrestled with the ghosts of Normandy, visions that tortured him like a cruel echo. He frequently drifted into a mental battlefield, images of his comrades flashing before him, their faces distorted by fear, pain, and resolve. But there was one face that stood out, cutting through the chaos, a nurse with gentle eyes and a calming presence. Her name was Anne, and in the terrible throes of war, she had stitched not just his wounds, but his broken spirit. Weeks turned into months. Yet each day Joe found it harder to piece together a normal existence. The moments of silence, which many relished, felt like an impending storm to him. They were filled with the sounds of gunfire, the cries for help, and the ringing in his ears that never seemed to fade. And then there were the other reminders, the flowers he planted that seemed to bloom in mockery of his despair, vibrant colors springing forth, while he remained cloaked in shades of gray. He attempted to reconnect with society, taking quiet walks through local parks, where children played and families gathered. Their laughter was like a knife, a stark contrast to the memories that plagued him. He would often sit on a bench, staring into the distance, as he replayed the last moments he had with Anne. Her kind smile after dressing his wounds felt like a lifeline amid shifting sands. It was a memory that soothed and tormented him at once. He wondered if she ever thought about him, if she had saved others after him, if those lives had allowed her to forget. His internal battles raged in solitude, and he found solace only in the fading pictures of fellow soldiers who had shared a bond that transcended life and death. Joe often met with a few old friends, fellow veterans like him, who understood the deep scars left behind by shared trauma. Together, they would reminisce, swapping stories that blended laughter with sorrow. Their stories moved seamlessly from the comical to the heartbreaking, revealing the multitude of ways they all longed for closure. As nights turned into somber reflections and days morphed into endless cycles of anxious repetition, Joe contemplated the journey back to Normandy. He imagined reconnecting with Anne, perhaps, once again, feeling her hand on his shoulder as he shared his gratitude, the closure that had evaded him for decades. Could he really face those memories? Could he find strength in gratitude? Each passing day brought him closer to an answer. Yet with every step, he felt the weight of history pressed down on his heart. The emotional toll of the war had woven itself so intricately into the fabric of his being that it felt insurmountable. Yet deep inside, a flicker of hope ignited. If he could confront his past, perhaps then he could finally reclaim his future, liberating himself from the haunting specters of what once was. As he contemplated the looming trip, Joe understood he was not merely searching for Anne. He was seeking to heal the fragments of his life that had been shattered by war. Perhaps gratitude could mend what time had frayed. Perhaps in her eyes he would find a reflection of hope, hope for himself and for the countless souls who had endured similar battles. With determination stirring within him, Joe resolved to take that trip, to walk the hallowed grounds of Normandy once more, and in doing so, reclaim a part of himself that he thought was forever lost. He needed to find Anne. She was the key to unraveling the tightly coiled threads of his past. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet streets of Omaha, Nebraska, Joe sat in his modest living room. The air carried a faint, almost nostalgic scent of fresh coffee, mingled with the dust of memories long sealed within his old army trunk. He thumbed through the yellowing pages of a scrapbook filled with the remnants of his past, faded photographs, medals, and letters from a time that felt like a lifetime ago. But one name loomed larger than the others: Anne. The haunting echoes of their brief, yet life-altering encounter during the chaos of Normandy clung to him like the weight of a soldier's pack. How could he have waited so long? Joe pondered, feeling a rush of emotion that twisted in his chest. Gratitude needs to be expressed, not bottled up in silence. It was more than a promise. It was a mission of the heart that began to stir within him. With resolve, he reached for his laptop, the cool metal glinting in the low light. The flicker of the screen illuminated his determined expression. Sifting through online archives, he searched for every scrap of information he could find. He became a historian of his own past, piecing together not only the location of the hospital where she had worked, but diving deeply into her life, the life of the woman who had saved him from the brink of despair. Hours turned into days as Joe transformed his yearning for closure into a relentless pursuit. Maps of Normandy sprawled across his dining table, dotted with notes and highlights. Each detail he discovered felt like a breadcrumb, leading him closer to Anne's heart. He pictured her gentle hands tending to the wounded, the soft hum of her voice cutting through the din of war. With every click of the keyboard, he felt a bond knit tighter, transcending the years and miles between them. As the late-night hours passed, a uniquely powerful mixture of fear and excitement surged within him. What if she didn't remember? What if she had moved on with her life? But the thought of never trying gnawed at him with just as much intensity. The memory of her compassion transformed his uncertainty into fire. If anyone could turn agony into triumph, it would be him, her survivor. Then, in the stillness of a rainy afternoon, an email pinged in his inbox, bearing a name he thought he might never see again. After years of searching, the urgency in his heart moved him to open it immediately. It confirmed what he had hoped: a small address outside Paris, a lead that suggested Anne was still alive. With every word, his pulse quickened. He envisioned crossing the expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, retracing the steps of fate that had first brought them together amid the horrors of war. The thought of standing before her, of expressing his thanks, filled him with a stirring fervor. But still, doubt crept in. Would she welcome him? Or would it only remind her of the pain they shared? Amidst these worries, another rap of determination held him fast. Whatever it takes, I must go. As Joe closed the laptop, a newfound sense of purpose radiated within him. He would keep his promise. It was time to face the past and embrace the future. Armed with the weight of his memories and the hope of forgiveness, he was ready for the journey ahead. His heart set on a reunion that would tie the threads of his life together once more. The sun hung low over the tranquil landscape of Normandy, casting golden hues across the serene fields that had once witnessed unfathomable chaos. It was July 17, 2004, and the air was thick with a bittersweet mix of nostalgia and anticipation, as Joe, now a frail octogenarian, stood at the very threshold of a memory that had haunted and comforted him for decades. He inhaled deeply, the scent of lavender mingling with the salty tang of the nearby sea, tethering him to the present, even as his mind drifted back to the fateful days of 1944. As he made his way through the familiar cobblestone streets, Joe felt the weight of years pressing down upon him. How much had changed? How many ghosts still lingered? The sounds of laughter in the distance mingled with the rustle of leaves, a stark contrast to the cries of men and the echoes of gunfire that once pierced this land. He had returned not merely as a visitor, but as a man burdened with gratitude and a yearning for closure. His heart raced with each step toward the quaint cottage that had once been his sanctuary of recovery. Memories flooded back, the soft touch of a gentle hand, the kind spirit of a nurse who gave him hope when despair had engulfed him, Anne. The name alone brought warmth to his heart, and yet a shiver of trepidation coursed through him as he wondered if she would remember him. Would it be the same for her? As he approached the door, time seemed to stretch, the seconds morphing into an eternity of yearning. What words could possibly encompass the gratitude he felt? He lifted his trembling hand and knocked softly, the sound echoing with a finality that filled him with both hope and dread. The door creaked open to reveal an elderly woman, her hair silvered and face lined with years that told stories of their own. Joe's heart slammed against his ribcage as their eyes met. There was recognition in those warm, hazel eyes. A flicker of surprise followed by a wave of pure joy that lit up her face. "Joe," she whispered, her voice a soft melody that transported him back decades. "You've come back." In that moment, the years fell away. They embraced, a tight, unyielding hold that spoke of all that had been unsaid. Tears welled in Joe's eyes, spilling over as he murmured, "Thank you for saving my life." Anne stepped back, her own eyes glistening with emotion. "You don't know how I've thought about you all these years. I prayed so many times for your recovery." Joe chuckled softly, the sound laced with a tremor of vulnerability. "I thought I'd lost the chance to tell you how much you meant to me. You were my light in the darkest hour." As they sat together, reminiscing about shared laughter, pain, and hope, the gaps of time and distance faded.